Okay, so a very good evening to one and all. Thank you so much for joining us here. My name is Shruti Sundaresan, and on behalf of Team ISF, I welcome you all to the very first opening day of India's largest virtual science festival, India Science Month Online. As the name suggests, ISMO is India's largest virtual science festival spread across an entire month, that is of January 2021. ISF aims to serve as a platform for public engagement, and our goal is to bring science closer to society. Allow me to run a small presentation by you all. We are here to bring the voice of science to the comfort of your home. India Science Month Online is going to feature more than 100 speakers from all across the globe, and we're going to cover topics like robotics, space, general science, science communication, healthcare, and more. Our festival has more than 30 talks, 15 plus panel discussions, workshops, demonstrations, online games, policy-based roundtable conferences, and 3 international competitions. The best part of the festival is that it's free for all. We truly believe in making science available to all, and this is our initiative in making science more accessible and fun for everybody. Our entire program schedule is up on our website. If you will head over to our website, you'll see our entire day-by-day schedule starting on the 3rd of January up to the 31st of January. All you need to do is head over to our website, check some boxes on which events you want to attend, add them to your calendar, and we'll send you reminders about the same. No event is possible without supportive partners, and we'd like to take this opportunity to thank our program partners, our knowledge partners, as well as our outreach partners, and you can see all of them on your screen. Without any further ado, I would like to now hand over to Professor Tarun Khanna from Harvard Business School, who will be taking this panel discussion ahead. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Shruti. Didn't you want to do some kind of poll quickly?
Yeah.
You change your mind?
I'll launch the poll.
Okay, so while she's launching, should I keep going or?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, good evening, everybody. It's a privilege to join you for this India Science Month. There's a small poll up. If you could just click it really quickly, that would be great. Meanwhile, let me introduce the panelists. Let me start with myself actually for a second. I'm Tarun Khanna. I'm a professor at Harvard University, Harvard Business School, been here 30 years. I'm interested in entrepreneurship and economic development, and in particular, using entrepreneurship as a way of promoting fairness in economic outcomes, moral outcomes, societal outcomes. And I'm very privileged to be here with 3 of my very, very good friends. So let me just introduce them briefly. They don't need any introduction, of course, particularly in India. But let me just say a nice thing about each of them, since I'm so fortunate to have them all as mentors and friends. Let me start with, in the order that we are going to go, with Devi Shetty, who I was just looking up is commonly called the Bypass Wale Baba, which I think is a very nice name. I like that name a lot, Devi. I'm going to use that next time you're in my class. So Devi is a frequent participant in my Harvard class, and I can't think of anybody who's taught me more about using science for the good of the poor in a financially self-sustaining way. And that last clause is very important because we can talk about all sorts of esoteric ideas. And I'm the first to do that as a nerdy academic. But at the end of the day, to bring it to actually have an effect on the ground is a whole different thing. And he's done that. So salutations to you. Next is my good friend, Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, who actually introduced me to Devi 20 odd years ago when he was starting Narayana Health. So thank you for that, Kiran. That was very nice of you. But I've known Kiran and John Shaw for a very long time. We had a common friend, Nilima, God bless her, who passed away sadly. Kiran, of course, is on every single list of powerful this and powerful that. But honestly, I don't care about those. What I really care about is that she's using that power for something useful. And no better person than these two frontline entrepreneur warriors to tell us about science and society. This, I think Varun and company called this panel Taal se Taal Mila. So it's about this, this juxtaposition of science and society. And last but not least is Vijay Raghman, who I've only known for 5-6 years and has become a really good friend to me. One of India's leading molecular biologists, Professor Emeritus at NCBS. By the way, everybody here has a Bangalore connection, including me from my high school years. So that's a cool side thing. Cool thing about Vijay is that he's got a gecko named after him, which is, I think, very nice. So that's my highest aspiration now, is I want some creepy crawly creature to be named after me before I finish my time on this earth, so that my son will think I'm cool. I think that's a good way to have a life aspiration. But Vijay is very comfortable in corridors of science, whether it's in Boston or Bangalore, as well as in the corridors of Delhi, where he's now principal scientific advisor to the government of India. So let me stop with that. We can't have a better panel to kick this off. Devi is kind enough to join us despite his daughter-in-law's birthday, which is going on right behind him. So he's going to have to excuse himself soon, or his son will be upset. So I'm going to start with him. So Devi, the common thing that you hear around the world is, poor country, why bother with science? Right? We've got many other pressing problems. First thing that people say, and of course, India is a rising lower middle income power now, but it's still poor. We've got a lot of poverty. So tell me how science has affected your worldview as both as a cardiac surgeon, particularly caring about the poor and pediatric cardiac surgery, but also as an entrepreneur.
Tarun, science is the most powerful democratizing force. The only hope for the poor people to come out of poverty is large-scale adoption of science in every aspect of human life. Let me just talk about my area, that is healthcare. Just one, the digital disruption of healthcare. What it can, if you remove the pen and paper from the hands of doctors, nurses, and technicians, and give them a smart tool, healthcare will become safer for the patients. Not only Indians, even for Americans and Europeans. Healthcare will become accessible. You don't need to see a doctor, visit a doctor's clinic for every problem. You can today see the doctor from your bedroom using your mobile phone. And that can solve more than 70 to 80% of your healthcare problems. And digitizing healthcare will make healthcare affordable, because you don't need to repeat hundreds of things what we keep on doing. Doctors don't need to keep on asking the same question to the patient. Every time a patient sees a new doctor, he will start off with what are your allergies? Do you have a family history? Patients are fed up of answering these questions. If all the data about the patient is available in patient's own mobile phone, all he has to do is to either show the mobile phone or transfer the data from the mobile phone to the doctor's email. That's all. And that is not very expensive, Tarun. That is something which we can afford to do it. And I believe that India as a country will become the first country in the world to dissociate healthcare from affluence. India will prove to the world that the wealth of the nation has nothing to do with the quality of healthcare its citizens can enjoy just by investing on the science, technology, and digitization. This is the gift India is going to give it to the rest of the world.
That's a fabulous sentiment, Devi. So in your comments, really, science is being equated primarily with the routinization and algorithmization, if I may use a new term, of practice, so that we can learn in a cumulative fashion. So it's really as much about scientific mindset as anything else. And you also very usefully point out it need not be expensive. It's about a mindset. What about in your own field of cardiac surgery? Tell us about the role that you've seen science playing in cardiac surgery over the last 20 years.
Science has totally disrupted everything what we do in cardiac surgery, Tarun. I'll just give a simple example. You can predict heart attack 20 years ahead if you are willing to lie flat under a CT scanner for just 2 seconds. That's all it needs. Like we see so many young people having heart attack who are athletic, who are very, no comorbid conditions, suddenly having heart attack. There is nothing like sudden heart attack. Heart attack can be predicted at least 20 years with almost 100% accuracy. And
so
that is possible.
Saurabh Ganguly could have been predicted, is it?
100%. 100%.
Yes. So how would that show up? What would you look for in a 2-second CT scan? Just out of curiosity.
See, the coronary arteries are nothing but pipes. We inject a little bit of a dye, which is radio opaque, and the CT scan scans it. It's exactly like a chest X-ray. Yeah. And you can see the finest arteries. Today, as a doctor, I love to touch my patients, but it is meaningless because today when I was a young medical student, Tarun, half the operation list in general surgical OT was laparotomy and proceed. That is, you open the abdomen to find out what is going on. That's when you make the diagnosis. Today, the images what we get from the abdomen or the chest are much better than what a surgeon can view by opening the tummy and looking inside. That is the kind of a technology which is available today. And what we thought in our lifetime will never be possible, patients who are destined to die in 2 years, 3 years, after one heart operation, they get out of the hospital in 5 days. And next thing they do is to go for a scuba diving 3 months after the surgery. So all these amazing things have happened in the last just 10, 20 years only by technology. This transformation, Tarun, is not brought about by doctors. It is done by the scientists and the entrepreneurs who have invested on the technology and developed the technology.
Let me thank you, Devi. That's very graphic. By the way, I just saw one of my friends here in Boston who is leading ophthalmic surgeon, and he showed me a new tool that he has, which actually shows the smallest possible blood vessels in the retina. So, you just put, I put my son went for eye checkup. So he put his eye there and you could see, such microscopic stuff. So, you can test for things like diabetic retinopathy and things of that nature, just like that, as opposed to somebody putting drops and staring and then closing your eyes for 1 hour and all this kind of stuff. Let me turn to Kiran. You want to pick up on anything that Devi said before he leaves us, and then I'll turn to Vijay.
Well, I think, Devi and I have been talking a lot about medtech in a big way, and both invested in many, many smart companies in Bangalore. And we've encouraged them because many of these medtech companies are obviously combine algorithms, AI, machine learning, and then they basically, adapt it to what there are, to any kind of unmet medical needs. And Devi has obviously been that kind of perceptive, insightful doctor who said, hey, if we could do this, this would be great. And many of these ideas have been born out of those kind of medical needs. And so that in mind, we've actually set up a very interesting translational business incubator at the hospital. In fact, one of my philanthropic objectives when I created the Mazumdar-Shaw Center at the hospital was, I said, Devi, I need to be given one floor for research, because I really think in India, hospitals should pursue research. Clinicians should be involved in research. And after a lot of persuasion, I think Devi completely now has bought into that. He says, yes, I completely agree with you. So thanks to that research culture that we have in the hospital now, we have a number of clinicians who are very interested to get associated with new medical technologies. And this new translational business incubator is the first of its kind in India, because the model we've created is very interesting. It is a model where a clinician is attached to an entrepreneur. And of course, we've created a wonderful space for medtech, and we have a number of medtech companies, startups there doing some wonderful things. For example, there's a medtech company that's actually able to use imaging technologies, AI, to actually deal with, surgical, with even things like the diabetic foot ulcers. And then they're able to use hyperbaric oxygen treatment to actually heal it. And all these experiments are now, and clinical trials are being done in conjunction with the clinician. So I think it's very exciting. So I think they're bouncing off ideas with a lot of clinicians and saying, would this be interesting? Would this help you? Would this improve healthcare? And I think Devi and I have also supported a couple of entrepreneurs who came up with a kind of a system where you could do a holter. I mean, a sort of a wireless holter, which you can actually do, using your mobile phone, and you can actually monitor the parameters for a day or two or whatever you want, without really causing the kind of normal problems that people have when they wear holters, and kind of companies. It is a company called Spectral Insights, and that became quite an interesting company, which Devi started basically mentoring, saying this is what you should be doing. I was the one that told him, I said, listen, you shouldn't have a single wire. Can you make everything a Bluetooth technology so that you just have sensors, and you have a phone, and you forget about it? And then those are the things people would like to wear and use and get tested with. So he actually came up with such technologies. So I think having this association with a hospital, having clinicians, mentoring these startups and telling them whether this is something that is useful or not, is going to be very exciting. And it's very interesting. We've had almost 300 applications when that incubator was built. And we had the great, opportunity to select the lucky 25 that could actually operate in that incubator. And I can tell you that there's so much excitement, because now you've got various companies who can actually collaborate with each other. So we are even finding that certain companies are saying, hey, I think we should work together for this technology and that technology. So, if you remember, you yourself were involved with Janhavi. Janhavi was a startup that was dealing with diabetes care, and how do you look at metabolic disease, and how do you keep it under control, and how do you manage it as a patient, and also as a prescriber or a doctor. Now, I think such technologies are becoming very interesting. These are digital therapeutics to really manage your disease better, but because you have to capture data a lot more. So you can go beyond that, and so on and so forth. So
this is, what's really
where
I finish
tech and translational research is becoming very, very interesting.
So thank you, Kiran. I mean, I think it's the point I'd love to have a chance to emphasize is this immersion into practice, right? The artificial separation of pure science, in my mind anyway, pure science from applied science and so on, is a bit overdone. We think of, a theoretical biologist and a practical something and an engineering person. There's, of course, value to specialization, but getting immersed in the phenomenon, getting everybody involved in creative acts is super important. Vijay, comment before Devi leaves?
You're mute, Vijay.
You're muted.
Yeah. Well, there are, in my opinion, three critical pillars on which transformation from development of technologies to acceptance in society takes place. And we've heard from Devi and Kiran examples of the first kind, which is really demonstration. That needs to be linked with policy facilitation. And thirdly, it needs to be linked with frugal innovation, which makes it widely acceptable in an environment. All too often, we are put off by the initial expense of a technology and the initial policy hurdles, and we linearly extrapolate and argue that they will not be accepted. That's a dangerous trap. Things take time, but when these things fall in place, extraordinary extrapolation can take place. One example is the cochlear transplant. It used to be very, very expensive when it came about. And people said, this is ridiculous, how can people afford it? But prices, because of changes in technology, have plummeted. And that has allowed wide acceptance. Another is the mobile phone. The early mobile phones used to be this big, and the charging setup used to be that big, and everyone laughed at it. But now it does everything. The phone is the incidental part. So keeping at it and tweaking policy and making it cheaper and better makes for acceptance.
Devi, you have some more time, or you have to go?
Yeah, I think I leave with Tarun, if you don't mind. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Enjoy the party.
Thanks.
So let's carry on with Kiran and Vijay. Kiran, you can you speak more about your? I'm conscious that you are plugged into both the Bangalore and India science ecosystem, as well as the Boston ecosystem through your affiliation with MIT. MIT is our rival institution, but we'll let that pass for now. So can you say a little bit about, how you see both the biotech sector in the global flow of science? Because I think it's very important to be part of the global community somehow.
So, Tarun, first and foremost, I'm very taken by this concept of an ecosystem. And I think Bangalore has one of the best ecosystems for science and innovation. I'm sorry, I'm being very partial to Bangalore, and I'm sure Vijay won't mind me being partial. But the fact is, there is a very strong connect now between academia, industry, and the government, which I think is a very, very important ecosystem to create. Because I think what we've seen is that, in Bangalore, many of the um, research institutions have got incubators, and these incubators are basically nurturing a number of startups coming out of some of the research out of their own labs and coming out of other labs. So I think this is a very healthy kind of ecosystem to start off with. And then, of course, many of these are then translating into policies which the government of Karnataka is actually supporting, such as, for instance, creating a regulatory sandbox where startups don't need to worry about any regulations. They can just keep doing their innovation. And for 2 or 3 years, they are not going to be bothered like they normally are to go and get this permission and that permission. So we've come up with that regulatory sandbox because we felt startups ought to focus on their innovation. They shouldn't be burdened with administrative responsibilities and regulatory responsibilities. That's working very well. Secondly, I think now, because of COVID, the importance of science and innovation and research at last is being recognized. And I think it's very exciting to see many, many companies now suddenly coming of age. We have a company called Bugworks. For a long time, struggling with investments, and they were coming up with next generation antibiotics. And there was no interest in antibiotics because it was considered to be a kind of a third world need. Why do we need more antibiotics? But today, with COVID, people realize that it's no longer a world that can be separated into developed and advanced or neglected disease and other diseases kind of thing. So I think today there's a lot of interest in investing in some of these areas. Then we have this coming together of technologies. The convergence of technologies is extremely important because in Bangalore we have both. We have a very good biotech setup. We have a very good IT setup. We even have the Institute of Bioinformatics and Applied Biotechnology, which is really a convergence of life sciences and, information technology. And all this is leading to very interesting startups. And I'm very convinced that we are very quickly going to become a part of the global ecosystem. We've in fact created the Bangalore-Boston Biotech Corridor so that we have these research partnerships and bouncing ideas back and forth, because that's what it's about. In addition to that, our government has even supported the Science Gallery Bengaluru, which is a part of the International Science Gallery Consortium. So all this is happening in a way where science is becoming cool, science is becoming exciting. We are, we have many discourses and discussions around high science, simple science. The science festival itself is very exciting, because all this is about creating that aura of science, research, and innovation.
I think those are great comments, particularly about the ecosystem and then general scientific literacy and the idea that science is cool, which I think is very important. Vijay, you want to pick up on any of those issues? Because I know you and I have had lots of conversations about the ecosystem and so on. But please.
I would have had a certain kind of conversation in 2019, and that it's a very different conversation today because of the intervening troublesome year. That brought about many things, both of concern and aspects which are very positive about how we can do things together. The standard narrative about ecosystems and how they contribute to the economy and society is, from the inside, that invest in us, it takes time to build things, it takes time for us to get together, leave us alone, and miracles will happen in due course. The problem with that narrative in an Indian context is a difficult person can say, very good, but we have so many problems. Why don't we just buy from the products of the Boston or the Bay Area ecosystem? Why should we worry about investing? And when we catch up economically, socially, health-wise, and so on, then we can invest in science. Now, this is proven so completely wrong by the pandemic. Our investment in India on fundamental research and building institutions which can work together resulted in an immediate response in the pandemic. Whether you are an algebraic geometer or an astronomer, you got into mathematical modeling or building PPEs or testing kits or vaccines. It was incredible. Why did that happen? Government also came in and made things much more flexible. Why didn't that happen earlier? So these are very interesting and important questions. The answer is, when you have an emergency and a shared sense of purpose, people do miraculous things. The question now going ahead is, how can we have that shared sense of purpose in 2021, 2022, 23, and not go back to the previous situation? The key is trust between industry, academia, and government and policy, as opposed to a heavy-handed regulatory approach. The regulatory approach came about as a consequence of egregious examples which swung the pendulum to one side. We now have a great opportunity to bring it to the global mean. So that's one point. We have a different way of doing science. The second point, which I'd like to leave on the table, is we need to also look at the costs of what we do. The chainsaw is an incredible invention, but it has extraordinary environmental costs which future generations pay. Deep sea fishing is an extraordinary invention, but it has extraordinary environmental costs which future generations pay. So now we need to look at all of what we do and calibrate the costs so that we address matters of climate change, the environment, and sustainable development. So things will be costlier. And in that, I think, developed countries which have tech available should have, for global good, tech transfer agreements which allow sustainable development addressing matters of climate change and biodiversity. Unless that is done, unless there's a global compact to do that, we will go back to 2019.
Thank you to both of you for those interventions. I'm getting some feedback from my WhatsApp saying that 71% of the audience watching YouTube streaming right now, it's a very large audience, are students. by which I think primarily college-age students. So it anchors, who our primary audience here is Vijay and Kiran. Let's talk a little bit. I want to come back to this issue of, trust and science literacy and things of that nature, because to me, those are the enabling conditions over which we can build pretty strongly. Sorry, let me just fill this in. 14% high schools, 5% faculty, 71% college students, to anchor you. Let's talk about the broader context beyond life sciences. By happenstance, all three of the panelists have an origin in sort of life sciences broadly construed, right? Biology and so on and so forth, and medicine. But tell me about the broader science infrastructure. Vijay, let me stick with you, given your post as PSA to the Government of India. Even in Bangalore, you have the space set up, for instance. So pick some area other than life sciences and tell us why these principles apply, or give some examples of that. And then I'll ask Kiran to chime in also.
Well, let's take, for example, the space sector. India has done incredibly well in the space sector, and that has been entirely as a government enterprise. But today, globally, the space sector has changed dramatically. There are, people in schools and colleges and small industries making satellites. There are others slightly larger launching these satellites. So space is turning completely inside out, as it were. ISRO has done that to itself. ISRO has created a new structure called InSpace, which is, gets all these ideas for launching, projects for launching, and basically whatever InSpace decides when it gets this, ISRO has to do that. So this is a dramatic transformation of ISRO. If you have an idea for a satellite and you can raise that resources, it comes to the InSpace board, and then you're allotted satellite, a rocket launch site and a date for launching. This is something which would spur the electronics industry, the communication industry, entrepreneurs all over the world rather dramatically. And this is a critical policy change. But it's not a policy change completely in the air. It's a policy change which is built on a very valuable structure, which has a culture of getting things done over many, many years. So that's one example. Another example where policy change can have huge impact is in research in the general environment. 90% of our research funds go to 10%, to places where 10% of our students go, i.e. central universities and institutions. 90% of our students go to state universities and colleges. The new National Research Foundation, which should come soon, will fund research across the country in a manner which the US National Science Foundation and other countries such as Korea, Switzerland, etc. have done to broaden the footprint of science and broaden the kinds of science which is being done. And it includes humanities and social sciences. So these are examples of rather dramatic changes which have very recently taken place.
Kiran, you want to chime in on the broader concept beyond
Well,
biotech?
I think, like Vijay just said, I think ISRO has actually spawned a number of startups, both in the sort of the satellite area as well as robotics. I mean, if you look at kind of companies that are coming up in Bangalore, it's quite exciting because a number of startups are coming up addressing some of these emerging opportunities, which I think is because there's so much interest in what ISRO is doing. I mean, there's a lot of innate interest in terms of young people wanting to get into space research. So that's what is actually creating all this interest and creating these kind of startups. Now, India is also, I mean, Vijay has just mentioned the National Research Foundation, which is going to be, a sort of similar to the National Science Foundation. But what is interesting is that the government is also coming up with the science and technology innovation policy. In that, they've actually seen, ways of democratizing science across academic institutes. Sorry. Also about taking advantage of online communication, getting various faculties connected, universities connected, both externally and internally. And I think this is an opportunity for cross-border research partnerships. And I think that's what needs to happen. I think there's also a lot of focus on industry academia partnerships. I'll just stop there.
Why don't you get a glass of water or something to catch yourself? I'll go to Vijay in the meantime, no problem. Vijay, what is the, so we've been talking primarily about the nexus between science and entrepreneurs. What about investing in fundamental scientific capability also? Because ultimately we have to build up our research infrastructure, and India is punching way below its weight in the global metrics. So how do we think about that?
I would put that into three compartments. The first, and three kinds of complexities which need to be addressed. The first is an immediate pushback which one gets from people who are, looking at the kinds of outcomes needed from investment. There are three categories of people. There are scientists who say, give us resources, and we don't know when the impact will come, but it will come. So look at all these past examples. There are people in society who say, we have multiple kinds of problems. It'll be wonderful if you solve them in a year or weeks or months. And there is the politics in a democracy which wants a solution by Friday evening. So, these three different speeds need to be reconciled. And I think, again, 2020 has shown how it can be done. And the model for that is the following. If you look at an institution or a cluster of institutions as a sphere, inside that sphere, the institution should have full flexibility in doing whatever they please, whether it is playing the tabla or making a jet engine. That's up to them how they use their resources, funded by the public. Then there's an interface which interacts with the outside. That interface, till recently, we have been reconciled to it delivering in bits and pieces over time, complaining about regulation not available, I can't do this, you can't do that, and so on. But that now needs to move at instant speed. It can move at instant speed because if this outside has a hard drive specialized to act, survey all the range of solutions available inside, look at all the range of problems being demanded which need solutions from the outside, and dynamically engage and provide really valuable solutions. This is what 2020 has taught us, that the creation of these interface structures. So these three need to come together, the inside, the interface, and the outside. And therefore the debate should go away from posing this wrong question of fundamental research versus applied. Everything is good science or bad science, and we'll do good science. Let us look at the institution as the unit of response and not individuals and what they're doing. Don't criticize someone for doing this kind of science or that kind of science, but make demands of the institution. There will be an emerging property of that institution which will constantly give.
I just wanted to say, Tarun, that look, I for one have always believed that science and innovation and entrepreneurship is a perfect recipe for non-linear economic growth. I mean, my own story is one of that. Instead of looking for a job, I decided to create a biotech company. And I can tell you that it is extremely important for India to really invest in science and innovation to really address many of the challenges that we're facing today. And I think if we really invest wisely in science, like it is being proposed today, I think the rewards would be really, really gratifying. And I really think we ought to invest in good science. I mean, I think I completely agree with Vijay. There is something called good science and bad science. There is imitative science and very inventive science. I think we need a balance of all. We need a balance of innovative and inventive and imitative science, but we must focus on good science. And I think that is what really is that is how the investment will be well spent.
Let me chime in with a statistic. Vijay, you will know this better than me, but I remember that the Human Genome Project, right, which cost between, if I remember correctly, $3 and $4 billion at the time that around $4 billion at the time that it came about, delivered benefits in the ratio of 150 to 1. Those are quantitative estimates by social scientists saying because of sequencing the human genome, how much value can we attribute to that discovery and way of thinking about genomics? 150 to 1. Now that's an outlier in a relatively short period of time. But there's a recent academic paper out of the economics department here at Harvard, which says that in the Western world, the payoff of a dollar spent on science, on average, in a pretty short lifetime, is $17, 1 to 17. I can't think of a better IRR, internal rate of return, in any investment in the most, in the best industrialist in India or in the world, other than spending. So the question really is, if each rupee that we spend can give us, and I would say that in India would be much higher because we are so low on the science adoptions spectrum across society that the marginal returns to investment are going to be, fabulously high. So if each rupee delivers, say, 20 rupees in benefit, why are we not putting more money into it? It's a much better return than other things.
In fact, I raised a question right now during the pre-budget, comments. Vijay, I did say that, look, first and foremost, you need to really bring back those incentives into research for industry. Because if you look at how much we've invested in research, just in the pharma sector, it's hardly 2,500 crores a year. That's the research incentives that are being reported in the CAG. And look at the returns on that. We are the one industry that have a $4 billion of trade surplus because of that research. So I think we ought to take note.
Yeah, right there is a multiplier. There is a multiplier.
You have to take that note of how much that payback is when you invest in research compared to any other sector.
So there are a lot of questions on chat, and I've been receiving them. So let me pick a couple of these. First one is to both of you, because it says, ma'am and sir, how can we compete against the coolness of cricket and Bollywood? So I think it's a very important question, right? Because it's about, I think, Kiran, you were saying that science is cool or should be made cool, right? So how do we get, particularly given the youth bulge that's coming into the mainstream of Indian society and the young people who are on the webinar right now, how do we compete against cricket? I mean, I love cricket and I love Bollywood.
Not everybody is good at cricket. Not everybody is good at acting, but everybody potentially can be good at science.
Okay, so there we go. That's and it's about science literacy, not just, you don't have to be a specialist. You have to be literate science. So that's one kind of aggregate question floating around in different ways in the chat. And the other is really a very deep, and this is a very reassuring type of question. It's a very deep interest in sustainability and environmental friendliness. And Vijay, you alluded to this earlier. And it's well understood that the development models of the next generation or two are going to have to be quite economically different from the way in which, let's say, the West developed in the last 2 or 3 generations. Either of you want to comment on that? Environmental sustainability and things of that nature. I mean, Delhi is always so polluted at this time of year that it's scary to me as somebody born in the city. But anybody on this issue?
Yeah, I think the environmental challenge is a huge one. And it's a huge one for some of the reasons I've said earlier, but also for some of the very important reasons about our collective responsibilities as citizens of a country or humans on a planet. What has happened over time is something which we have not imbibed as humans. We have moved from the period of prior to the first industrial revolution, of wanting to survive on this planet to become those who wield the paintbrush and determine the future of the planet. This has not entered everyone's heads in every part of the world. That needs to get in. And because of that not getting in is why we are now at the precipice. The second point is, throughout human history, we have had the confidence that when we arrive at a crisis, human ingenuity will take us out of it. That is true when you're in a certain part of the curve, but we might have reached a certain plateau in the way we're dealing with the planet in terms of carbon footprint, greenhouse gases, biodiversity, and so on. And therefore, we need to move forward. And that's the third point. How can we do this? There have been some rather dramatic changes in technology which point to a solution. Solar power, for example, has plummeted in cost. There are other forms of renewable energy which will come, which are even more environmentally friendly. So power will be available. Second major invention over the last over 15 years is the dramatic changes to the power transistor. The power transistor, your charging devices used to be this big earlier. Now they're this small. And the reason is power transistor technology has changed, which allows you to drive motors more efficiently with DC, low DC voltage. That means, your TV sets, your, various kinds of mobility devices and so on can be made easily. These technologies are now portable to be used along with the third, which we saw during the pandemic, that is distance working. In other words, high quality design, manufacturing, computer-aided design can be done at distant locations. Design is going to be the key value which people develop, whether it's from a shoelace or a rocket. And quality design can be done by using these technologies which are available from remote locations, whether it is in molecular biology or in telescopes, and they can be exported. So we must go from a society whose value comes only from localized manufacturing, commuting, and to use these important values. Now, India, with its young demography and its distributed location, must drive and lead this, because we cannot imitate the models of big cities anymore and have everyone migrating for jobs. Now, is this feasible? I think this is, if we take on a responsibility for the commons like never before.
Kiran, you want to comment on this sustainability side?
Well, I started my business developing enzyme technology. And this was a long, long time before it was fashionable to talk about environmental sustainability. And I remember it was such a cool idea to replace polluting chemical technologies with eco-friendly enzyme technology. And I can tell you that it was a very innovative business model that we had to pursue, because we had to keep developing new enzyme technologies to boot out some of the chemical processes. And I can tell you that itself created a very interesting business for me, decades ago. So I think, today you can actually create very interesting business models. And I get very excited when I go and visit some, I went to visit a coffee plantation the other day, and they said, remember you demonstrated that enzyme technology for coffee processing, you won't believe it, we are using it today. So that made me feel very happy. There was another pulp, paper and pulp plant whom I had developed enzyme technology for, and they were so excited, saying, that the technology is still being used today and it's brought down pollution levels drastically. Of course, I sold my enzymes business to a Danish company who are now promoting those enzymes. But I'm just saying, these are the kind of technologies that have actually helped to basically sustain the environment. And I think there are many, many such technologies which Vijay alluded to, whether it's renewable energy. I think the big challenge today is energy storage. And I think those technologies are also going to be extremely important. Why can't we look at investing and developing those technologies? So I think there are huge opportunities for us to look at environmental sustainability in many, many ways. And I think that's the kind of excitement that it should spark in young people today. and why should they not, why they shouldn't really keep getting obsessed with watching Bollywood movies or cricket, but rather start reading up online, because in our days we never had online.
Yes.
Yes. Today you go online and just click anything exciting about science, whether it is robotics, whether it is 3D printing, whether it is AI, whether it is anything. You can learn so much. So I think nobody has an excuse today of not being fired up by science and technology, because so much information is out there. And there are wonderful, wonderful science made simple kind of books out there which people should start reading. I remember when I was growing up, there was a wonderful series called Understanding Science, which to explain science in such a simple way, but it was such a cool way of explaining science. I really got excited about science. So I think young people should read such books.
So,
Kiran, that dates you and me, because
Yeah.
I used to read Understanding Science also.
Yeah.
So there are lots of questions on the chat about, how do we make science, and it builds on this last couple of comments. How do we make science accessible to high school students who generally are still not, how should I say it, experiencing the fun of science, maybe getting their hands dirty, trying different things, and also the less privileged sections of society for whom science just seems inaccessible. Right? So as relative, yeah,
Tarun,
go ahead.
I have actually partnered with a very interesting NGO called Agastya Foundation.
Yes.
And we have actually created a science on wheels, a laboratory on wheels, and
Fabulous,
education on wheels. And we've actually, in fact, we've even partnered with Harvard for one of the modules that I sponsored. And this is actually taking science to the villages. And I think it's becoming very exciting for young students in villages, school children, to really come and tinker around in that little mobile lab. Also, we are teaching science to these kids. But again, like, Vijay and I were alluding to, simple books like Understanding Science, if that can be actually made available in our school curricula, I'm sure kids will be able to understand science much easier.
Much better, yeah. Vijay, you want to talk about the Atal Innovation Mission and the tinkering labs and things like that, apropos of this?
Yes, absolutely. Many in our audience may not be aware of this, but the Atal Innovation Mission, which was formulated and pioneered by a team which was in which Tarun was a major leader, has put in place a variety of major programs in the country. But relevant to Tarun's question, it's put in place what are called tinkering labs in several thousand schools. And these allow school kids to play around in these labs, not in a structured manner, but do anything from electronics to biology to astronomy and coding and so on and so forth. And this is actually quite amazing how this has caught on. And not only has it caught on in these places, but it's now scaling in partnership with multiple other agencies so that multiple schools will have this. This is very important. And you know what Kiran said about having books like Understanding Science, but also places in schools where people can have microscopes and telescopes and play around with electronics and just look around outside on the roadside to the skies. What's happening is just amazing. That combined with, I think there are 2 or 3 other things actually which are very important, which we must push. One is language skills. Language skills in your native language and bilingually in English also. That must come in very early. The next I would put in is music, and that's very important to have a cultural rootedness, but also to appreciate your society and what's going on and its traditions. So I would put music and mathematics in that category. And so music, mathematics, language skills, and the third is sport. If these 3 things are encouraged, then pretty much you can grasp anything else later on in life. But if you miss these 3 when you're young, it's difficult. You're always being pushed to learn skills which are such fun learning early on that they're challenging later.
So, Kiran, any last comment, because I'm instructed to wrap up our panel so that we stay on time. This is the first panel in the India Monthly Science Festival that Varun Agarwal and his team have done. Kudos to them all. Let me give Kiran the last word, and then I will thank you all.
Well, I really want to talk about the concept of the Science Gallery Bengaluru, which we are putting up in the country, which is really about taking science to society and encouraging young people to get interested in science. So, as the museum is being built, we've also come up with a lot of satellite events. And one such event I can tell you was celebrating the 150 years of the periodic table, which we had at the Bangalore Metro station. And they have a nice auditorium. And so we put up a big exhibition of the periodic table. I can tell you that that was a best visited exhibition of young children. School children came from all across the city. They came, we have made it such fun. We talked about the periodic table. We had puzzles, we had foods made, to guess what part, which, element was there in which food and things like that. So, children and parents and teachers were very excited about that exhibition. So I'm just giving that as an example. Then we had a wonderful exhibition on water, and we looked at various aspects of water, including the sounds that water makes, the microbes that live in water, various aspects of water. Okay. Um, then of course we are now coming up with a obviously a very contemporary exhibition called the Contagion, which is obviously about pandemics, so that young people can really start understanding and getting interested in science in different ways. So it is a experimental laboratory based kind of science gallery, and a very educational one, and also one that allows interaction and discussions around science. So let's hope that this is going to be the most
I think
spot in town for all the young people to gather and get excited about science.
so. Just on that note, the next event is related to this organization that Kiran was telling us. The next exhibition, Contagion. So you can stick around and watch that.
Okay.
As it turns out, it's a good setup, Kiran. Thank you. So with that, we've talked about new imaging techniques that Devi talked about. We talked about curing things like foot ulcers and retinopathy. We've talked about clean enzymes. We talked about cube satellites and a whole range of very fancy science that actually has immediate implications. And please remember, each rupee spent is at least 20 rupees of payoff. Fatafat. So we need to get moving. Let me thank Kiran and Vijay for being so kind as to kick this off for the India Science Festival, and thank the organizers, and thank Devi in absentia. And with that, good luck, and have a wonderful festival.
Thank you, Tarun. Thanks. Bye, Vijay.
Thank you, everyone. Bye. Bye. Thanks, Kiran, Tarun.
Bye-bye.
Right. So on that note, we have ended with our session of Taal se Taal Mila, that is bringing scientists and entrepreneurs together. The next session, as pointed out by Professor Khanna, is by Dr. Janhavi Phalkey, who is the director of Science Gallery Bengaluru. Could I please request Dr. Phalkey to turn on her video? Dr. Phalkey is a science and technology historian, which is such a unique concept, and she has been one of the main people responsible for building Science Gallery Bengaluru in India. As rightly pointed out by Kiran Mazumdar ma'am, it is such an innovative concept. It is a wonderful initiative to bring science and art together. And Dr. Phalkey, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your kind words.
Right. So, Dr. Phalkey, as decided earlier, we will show your video, the video of Science Gallery Bengaluru first, and thereafter begin with your session. Yeah?
Lovely.
And I would just like to inform our attendees that after Dr. Phalkey's session, we have an interview with Dr. Rodney, Prof. So stick around for that. Can I please request Misha to start sharing the screen for the video?
Science and scientific temper is so important for societal building. Getting people to understand what the scientific challenge is, how science is solving our problems, will actually make our society better.
Science Gallery is the world's only university network dedicated to public engagement with science and art.
Science Gallery Bengaluru is a part of an international network of galleries.
The members of the Science Gallery education looks like in the 21st century, sparking catalytic conversations and connections with other galleries and universities across the network.
Science Gallery Bengaluru is science, culture and experiment. As a public institution for research-based engagement, we would like to bring science back into culture.
By opening up science so it's visible through the eyes of artists or just citizens and the public at large, we understand the science more deeply and better.
So we don't want to be the place which gives more and more knowledge in science to young adults. What we want them to do is to think about science. We want them to come and find out what science is in their life, what science means to their lives, where science intersects with their lives.
Transdisciplinary approaches to education and innovation are fundamental to future-proof the university.
Science Gallery is in conversation not only with artistic practice but also with the social sciences and humanities.
At Science Gallery Bengaluru, we've pioneered a public laboratory complex which has 6 experimental spaces. We have a wet lab, which is a generalist natural sciences lab. We have a materials library and a workshop, a new media laboratory which is accompanied by a black box theatre, a food lab which is attached to our cafeteria, and a theory lab.
So at the general visitor, SGB has its different exhibition seasons, which are both exhibitions and a diverse set of programs. And for young adults, we focus on giving them access to experts from all disciplines all over the world through workshops, masterclasses, residencies and more.
ನಾವು ಕಲಿಯೋದಕ್ಕೆ ನಮಗೂ ಕಲಿಯೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಸಿಗುತ್ತೆ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ನಾವು ಇನ್ನೊಬ್ಬರಿಗೆ ಕಲಿಸ್ದಂಗೂ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ.
It was a very good spread from academic textbooks to pop culture references, and I'm looking forward to more such events.
I mean, it's intersection with culture and art, and it's something really different.
Science Gallery Bangalore can build a deep appreciation of science, its questions, its culture, and also inculcate temperament.
Science Gallery will be a place where new knowledge and new ways of understanding could actually emerge.
The most important relevance of Science Gallery Bengaluru is that it is a state-sponsored initiative.
We looked at a partnership model with scientific institutions, with the private sector and others, which will operate independently, which will have the freedom to collaborate with whoever the gallery wants.
Together, we can reach millions of curious minds, enabling young people around the world to reach their full creative potential.
Come join us. Come join us in this mission to bring science back into culture and to take science to the public.
That was really lovely.
Thank you.
Dr. Phalkey, I definitely had a lovely time watching the video, and I'm so sure that all our attendees did too. On that note, I hand over the dais to you. Please take it ahead from there.
Lovely. Thank you very much. So briefly, it's absolutely wonderful to have the supporting words of Dr. Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, who chairs our governing board and has been incredibly supportive of the project in Bangalore. So as you've seen in the film, we work quite closely with the Indian Institute of Science, National Center for Biological Sciences, and Trishti Institute of Art Design and Technology. And so we're a very young institution. We started programming last year, so October last year, and we finished 3 exhibitions so far, one of which has been completely online. And the first one, as Kiran already mentioned, was about to mark the 150 years of the periodic table. and the second was about water. The third was called Phytopia. And for those of you who are interested, actually do please sign up. The India Science Festival has been wonderful to us, and in partnership, we are organizing a mini encore of Phytopia. So on Sunday, the 24th of January, between 11 and 1 p.m., you will be able to sign up to our mediated sessions. So let me say a little bit about our next exhibition, which is why I'm here to speak to you. So the next exhibition is called Contagion, and I'm very pleased to share share our poster with you. So just give me a second. But while I prepare to share the poster with you, it opens, the exhibition will open in April 2021. So here's the poster for it. Let me see that you can see it properly. Yeah. So we launch in April 2021. And the way we are looking at Contagion is the underlying principles of how things transmit. So transmission of diseases, transmission of emotions, and transmission of behaviors. So how do things spread? Spread in a manner that is uncontrollable, or that doesn't remain in our control. So that's the idea behind it. We are doing this in partnership with the Robert Koch Institute, which is located in Berlin, Germany. And many of you probably who are following the Contagion quite closely have already heard about them. In fact, the new Public Health England institution that has been created is modeled on the Robert Koch Institute. So we are very happy to be partnering with an eminent institution like this. The exhibition will be fully online. And I think one of the key things, as Kiran already mentioned, about our exhibitions is that they are mediated. So we have young adults who are in conversation with the exhibition visitors, also when the exhibition is online. So what I want to say is I'll say a little bit about how our exhibitions are organized, and then I'll say a little bit more about how you might actually join us. So the first thing that I want to say is that Phytopia, which I already mentioned, you can sign up to visit within the India Science Festival on the 24th Jan between 11 and 1 p.m. And with that, we can close this, and I can talk to you a little bit more about what we do in our exhibitions. So what we try to do is to bring people, artists and scholars from the natural and human sciences. So what I mean is scholars from the humanities, from the social sciences, and the science and the natural sciences come together to talk about, what are our sort of burning concerns, what are our newest concerns. And in this case, in the exhibition about Contagion, they will be talking about this transmission of emotion, of diseases, of behaviors. And we will have the exhibition running over a few days, during which you'll be able to see films that are related to the topic. You will also see, witness public lectures, learning modules, masterclasses and workshops, video campaigns, and it'll be covered by artists and scholars from across the world. So leading scholars and artists from India as well as from elsewhere. Now, coming back to the mediators, the gallery is targeted at young adults between the ages of 15 and 28, or 15 and maybe even 30 at some point. And mediators are the face of the gallery. Mediators are the largest part of the team and the most important part of the team. What they do is they interact with visitors, and they get to interact not only with visitors, but also during their training as mediators, they get to also interact with artists and scholars from across the world. And they also get to interact with each other. So as peers and as young people, they also get to know each other quite well. What is interesting to know, probably for those of you who are young adults, is that this is also paid position. So for those of you who are interested in Contagion, you can participate in two ways. You can come join us in April and visit the exhibition. But also, for those of you who are young or know young people who would like to work as mediators with us and learn with artists and scholars, and also from visitors and from their peers, please sign up to our mediator call as well. So needless to say, this presentation was brief. I hope our film and my brief sort of, expose on our exhibition has given you enough to think about. We are happy to take questions, and we are happy to be reached to, and are there for you to, visit us and enjoy. And we really hope and look forward to having almost all of you join in for Contagion. Thank you very much to Varun and his colleagues at the India Science Festival. And thank you, Shruti, very much for your kind words. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
Dr. Phalkey, thank you so much for joining us. It was an absolute pleasure. And as I can see in the chat, we have so many messages coming in asking how they can join in as mediators. So we've linked, we're going to make sure to link the Science Gallery Bengaluru website link in the chat, so they can head over there and make sure that you head over to their website and do drop in a word. And we'll also be hosting the Phytopia exhibit at our festival in January.
Exactly.
So we're looking forward to hosting everybody there. And thank you so much, Dr. Phalkey. It was a pleasure. Thank you for being a part of this revolution of bringing science and art together in India. Absolute pleasure to have you.
And it's been my pleasure to be with you this evening, and thank you for the opportunity to share, what we collectively do. At the end of the day, the goal for the India Science Festival and for Science Gallery is the same: to take science to the public. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Right. And on that note, I would request Professor Rodney Brooks and Mr. Varun Agarwal to kindly switch on their videos. Professor Brooks, thank you so much for joining us. Mr. Agarwal, thank you for joining us. We are super excited about this session. A little bit of introduction. Professor Brooks is the CTO and founder of Robust.ai. He is also a professor of robotics at MIT and is considered a guru in the field of AI and robotics all over the world. Mr. Varun Agarwal is going to be interviewing him. He is a alumni of MIT. He has been involved. He's the founder of India Science Festival and is also the co-founder of Inspiring Minds. He's recently written an AI sci-fi book, and that is very much available on Amazon for all of you to check out. On that note, let's find out, will 21st century robots partner with humans? Over to the two of you.
Thank you, Shruti. Thanks, Rod, for taking time today for the festival.
Hi, Varun.
Hi. No, I know you're very busy, so really appreciate taking time right in the beginning of the year. So, Shruti has given a quick introduction for Rodney Brooks. I had the pleasure to be located in his lab in CSAIL in 2005 to 7. And I want to show this funky building where we used to be situated. This is the Computer Science and AI lab at MIT, also called the Data Center. And Rodney Brooks' lab at that point of time used to be in this area, which we used to call the nose. But the building itself is very interesting, and you guys can read them. And we use these humanoid robots. One of things which I saw was that it was over 20 years. So my first question is that what can robots do today? I mean, what has been the progress in the last 20 years, and what they still can't do? Because when people think about robots, they suddenly think they are these androids, which are in a Star Trek, who can do all kinds of things and almost like humans. But where are the boundaries? What have we achieved and what have we not achieved in the last 20 years?
Yeah, mostly we haven't achieved a whole lot, I think is the answer. There's been a lot of hype, a lot of images shown of what robots could be, but that's mostly still aspirational. Robots in factories continue to operate, but they are still not that much different from what they were 30 or 40 years ago. They're mostly scripted in Pascal or Java-like languages. They're not told what to do. They're programmed to do things. I had a company for 10 years trying to change that, and we made some progress, but the industry is very, very careful about adopting new technologies in manufacturing, and so that's still an ongoing process. And mostly those robots and people can't interact at all. Now, in the lab, we have had a lot of progress in using deep learning to be able to detect people, read their expressions, see their faces, see what they're doing, but that hasn't been backed up by a real sense of interaction. When you were at CSAIL, you might remember the robot Domo, which interacted with people, earlier the robot Kismet, which interacted with people, but that hasn't gone mainstream. Now, some of those people who are working on those robots started companies to try to commercialize them. Cynthia Brazil started a company called Jibo to commercialize interactive robots for the home, but she really got completely beaten by Amazon and the Alexa system. Alexa is not a robot, has no robotic capabilities, but it has such an enormous back end to it in the Amazon cloud that it could do things that her robots could never do, and the company did not succeed ultimately. So robots are not always the right solution. We're much better with them navigating than we were 30 years ago, certainly, but our robots are not dexterous in any shape or form. Now, COVID has had an impact on this. Can I talk about that impact briefly?
Sure, please go ahead.
COVID has pushed home deliveries, and that has pushed for automation of home deliveries. We already had at Amazon the idea of moving packages around, and there are many companies around the world who do that now, including Delhivery in India, for instance. But it has still been that the picking of the things out of a shelf was manual, done by people, and the packing of boxes. Now, what has happened in the last 18 months is a real push on the picking part being automated. And there are lots of companies in trials of picking up objects out of a bin or out of a tray. And no one had really worked on the packing process, automating that at all, not even in research. So picking is moving towards being implemented for real, and packing is now becoming a research topic in universities. So it will accelerate things. But the idea of robots being everywhere in our lives is a long way off. And perhaps the best example of that is there's been so much hype from so many people about self-driving cars, which is turning cars into robots. And there were all sorts of predictions about how soon that would happen. Lots of companies spent billions of dollars, literally billions of dollars, on the process. But we do not have yet any really deployed self-driving cars. And I think that we're going to have to change our infrastructure somewhat for them to be successful, just as we changed our infrastructure in our cities 100 years ago and changed the roads in the cities in order to have cars in our cities.
Sure, sounds good, Rod. And I was looking at your tweets when I was working for this session, and you mentioned the same things about cars there, where you said that Elon said that by the end of this year, we'll have a lot of fully autonomous cars, and there are none of them, which is interesting to know that that's what has finally happened. And what you said is that deep learning works well in the lab, and if, at least in the lab and the benchmarks we have in papers, we see that computer vision is solved to quite an extent. But when we're doing things in practice, even it's just that it still doesn't work very well in unstructured environment. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd say deep learning is successful in what it does. I mean, that's why we have spoken agent systems like Alexa, for instance. Deep learning has been totally successful there. We couldn't have far field microphones 10 years ago. Now they work, and you can go from in hundreds of languages. You can go from the speech signal to the transliteration to what the syllables are, and then processing can take that on. And with deep learning for vision, we can label images a lot. We can do lots of labeling of images. But an actual application takes more than just the labeling of images. There's all sorts of other stuff going on. And that's where we're falling down.
Sure. So Rod, just picking on that, what would be, 3 to 4 very challenging problems in robotics as on today? So when people are thinking about, and we have a lot of students here, just for your knowledge, most of our attendees are college students and some are faculty. And then we also have a few less than 10% high school students. And most of them pick up problems which people are trying to solve in papers and so on, which are these benchmark sets, etc. And there's sometimes a rush of getting like 0.5% improvement on the result, which is already there by doing some jugglery of the network. Whereas this doesn't always, go to the questions which are important for robotics, right? And so what would be 3 or 4, really challenging problems in robotics, which you think need to be addressed as we go forward in the next decade, which have been unsolved, but you think there is hope on solving it in the next decade?
Well, except for the last part, if I think there's hope. If I thought someone would have already solved it. So the interesting things are the cases that we haven't solved. And then, of course, it's research, and we don't know how hard.
So let's hear about them. Yeah.
Yeah, but here's a challenge that would have enormous impact. Our robots cannot manipulate things. So having any sort of manipulation will open up all sorts of possibilities. For over 40 years, the grippers on our robots really haven't changed. They're just a parallel jaw, 2 things go side to side, and we can't do dexterous things with them. So dexterity is an enormous challenge, but progress on it would be great. So that's one thing which I think is really important. Now, another thing, we through a process called SLAM, simultaneous localization and mapping, we are now able to build 3-dimensional point clouds of the world and know where stuff is in the world. So robots can navigate much better than they could years ago. And that's opening up some possibilities. But those robots really don't understand what the objects are around them and the affordances, if you like, of the objects, how to open the door handle. Oh, that point cloud there, that group of points that's moving, that's a person. Maybe I should be a little deferential to them and not think that I can just treat them as a static object and drive right past them. So interaction with people. And here deep learning helps because we have networks which can partition a person from those point clouds, know where their arms are, know where their head is, know which way their head is facing. And so the robot could make inferences, if you like, about whether the person is aware of the robot, and then have some sort of appropriate interaction. There are, here in San Francisco, there are robots in some of the hospitals that take the dirty sheets down to the laundry, take the dirty dishes, move stuff around so that there are not people having to do that, and they can spend time with, the nurses can spend time with patients. But those robots sort of take over the corridors. And so visitors are sort of, what is this robot thing doing in my way? I think robots would be much more acceptable if they knew how to interact with people. So that's a second really great example, which I think there are a lot of tools already there, which make it almost possible. It's a matter of figuring out how to put it all together.
Sure, no, makes sense. And Rod, I think that also goes to the title of this session, right? Which was that 21st century robots will partner with humans. Can you talk a little more about what you mean by saying the 21st century robots will partner with, with people? A lot of people think that robots will take away jobs of a lot of people around the world. And you're presenting a different point of view on saying that they will partner with people. So if you can give examples on what it means, and then what do we need to do in robotics, and probably what your company, Robots.ai, is also doing to help robots partner with people in the coming decades?
Yeah, one reason I say that robots and people have to, and robots have to partner is because the robots are just not going to be able to do everything. So they'll only be able to do almost nothing unless there's a person involved in some of the task. And of course, you can make robots do dull, repetitive things. And for the parts of the world where the demographic inversion is having a big impact, and that, for instance, is already Japan, Italy, and parts of Europe, but increasingly in the US and in China, there'll be a tremendous inversion of the number of elderly people to younger people. If every person had a job helping the elderly in many of those countries, there still wouldn't be enough help for the elderly. So I think there's going to be a real pull for technologies and machines which let older people have both dignity and independence and stay in their homes longer. And one might say, well, it would be better if their children looked after them, but the demographic facts are that, in China, one child is going to have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, and 8 great-great-grandparents all alive at the same time, and that will be the only child of those 12, 2 plus 4, 14 people. So it's just not going to be possible. There needs to be other technologies, other things that help look after the elderly people. And I don't mean as companions or taking away human love or anything like that. I mean things like, helping people get into and out of bed, helping people in their bathrooms, helping them with the things that ultimately, for many elderly people, either children or nurses have to do. And there you have the elderly person interacting with the robots at all times, or whatever we're going to call them. We may not call them robots, but they'll be intelligent machines with physical capabilities. And so that's an interaction that is, by the nature of the pull, due to demographics, going to make that the case.
Got it. So what you're saying is that it is not that robots in these use cases which you have described will take away jobs from humans, but they won't be. It is the need of the technology which will be beyond what the population can serve. And that's why robots will augment and serve that unserviced need, which probably we already don't have enough people to do.
Right, there are these mega trends, demographic inversion is one of them, which are changing the world around us. It's not going to be today's world just 80 years later. It's going to be a different world.
Sure.
Different things. For instance, farming, because of climate change, farming is going to change dramatically because where we currently farm certain things, the climate will change. And probably the safest way that it's going to happen is by going to indoor farming, getting rid of meat that's, made by animals, but instead, made by some other process, biological process, but coming from cells, indoor farming. And that will require automation also. You've maybe seen photographs of racks and racks of leafy green vegetables stacked up, 10 meters high. You can't have people climbing up there and doing that. To make it efficient as an indoor farm, you need robotic capabilities for that, for instance. But ultimately, the robots interact with people down on the ground.
Sure. And how would we build robots which will partner with humans? Again, just coming back to things, is it like a different area than building robots which are today in the industry? And I think you mentioned a little bit of an example of knowing that where a person is versus where an object is and behaving differently. But is there more to building robots which partner and interact with humans than this?
Well, yeah, there's, especially when you get to elder care, there's I think all sorts of interesting ethical questions and ways in which people use their judgment. Will the robots be able to use the judgment in looking after an elderly person? So let me give you an example. Let's suppose it's 25 years from now and I'm still alive, I'm hoping, I have a robot helping me get out of bed in the morning, and it notices that I have soiled my pajamas. Ooh. And I say to it, please don't tell my children. Now, what should that robot do? Should it tell my children that dad is having some problems, or should it, keep my secret? As these robots understand speech, how does that translate into what is the appropriate behavior? I think we're going to have some real interesting ethical problems. They won't necessarily be solved by having the robots reason at runtime. It may all come down to having policies and regulations that we find are appropriate. I don't know. It's going to be an interesting time.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a very, very interesting aspect for our audience, because generally, at least in India, we see science and technology as a separate bucket, and ethics, policy, the humanist science as a separate bucket. And by what you're saying is that if we really want to make these robots which interact with people, we definitely need to do the science and technology part. But these disciplines need to come together to think about the new kind of scenarios which robots will face and will have to act in.
And we've seen, I think, a tremendous failure in the last 10 years in a parallel world with the issue of privacy around social media. And that hasn't been, how our data is protected. We didn't worry about that. I think we're in tremendous problems from that, because now the companies can take the data they have about us and sell that data in ways that we never imagined. And it's causing a lot of turmoil around the world. So there's an example where those things didn't come together in time, and we're paying for it.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And I think one of the problems is that technology and science is moving so fast, so quickly that policy is not able to catch up. And most of our policymakers are anyway not attuned to these advances. So I think there's a gap which needs to be fulfilled. Rod, so a lot of questions here, the audience questions which I'm seeing is around a question which I'm sure you have heard hundreds of times, and I know you have very strong views on it, is that will humans become will robots become smarter than humans, right? And I know that you have talked about human intelligence, robots reaching human intelligence, and how you see it is very far away. Can you, first demystify for our audience that what does, by maybe examples, what does a robot with human intelligence mean, and how is it different from the robots or the kind of technology we have today? And why do you think that is very further away? If you still think, in today's session, I saw your remarks yesterday, and if it has not changed by today, why is it further off? And if you can demystify some of it.
Yeah. So I often get, polled in where someone's, asking a few experts, when are we going to have certain levels of intelligence? And I'm always the far future one. I'm Bill Gates calls me a pessimist. I think I'm an optimist, but that's a difference. But what do we mean by human level intelligence? Well, science fiction, and this is from the, historically with the golem, but when science fiction was around, a lot of science fiction was developed around the idea of having robots which were indistinguishable from people. That was Isaac Asimov's fiction, for instance, and we see that in things like Star Trek and lots of movies. What would it take for a robot to have that level of intelligence that it would be something that we would consider, that's, they're no different from a person really in their capabilities. That's what human level intelligence is about. And many people think that we're almost there. And I think that we actually probably don't understand at all how to build truly intelligent systems. We understand how to build somewhat intelligent systems, but the analogy that I used about a month ago in a blog post that I wrote, and people can go to rodneybrooks.com/blog and see all my blog posts there. The analogy I used was, right now, AI is like aviation in around 1920. There's a tremendous amount of promise, things that we can do with aviation, things we can do with AI. And there's going to be lots and lots and lots of applications. But human level intelligence is not like aviation at all in this analogy. Human level intelligence is like space travel. And so no matter how better our airplanes get, they're still going to be, just stuck on Earth. They're not going to be able to fly around the solar system. And so I say that we don't even know how to start to build human level intelligence yet. We just know how to build things that, let us move around the world a little faster in analogy.
Sure. And Rod, just if I can push you a little on that, you say that we don't even know how to build human level intelligence. Is that because we still can't articulate the question well or put the question in scientific language? Or why do you think we are not able to even make that start? Because, a lot of people around the world have got very excited with deep learning, right, in the last 10 years. And if you can just simplify somehow for my audience that why, when we can have Alexa, even with an example, why is that jump with human level intelligence so large?
Okay, so that's why I was trying to do in the analogy between, we've got aviation, but human level intelligence is going to be something different from that, space travel. So, we as scientists made a decision, and I'm writing a book about this right now. Please keep poking me and saying, where's that book? Because it will help me write faster. But in the period 1945 to 1965, we as scientists made some decisions that intelligence, both in human intelligence and artificial intelligence, was equivalent to computation. And to say that, to most people, that's just so obvious that they accept it. But imagine you wanted to build, SpaceX didn't exist and you wanted to build cheap access to space. You as an entrepreneur, you'd probably, think, oh, well, how am I going to get the space cheaper? And you'd look at how to get better rocket engines, how to get things reusable, what sort of fuel efficiency you could get, all sorts of questions around that. You wouldn't say, oh, I'll just write a computer program and then we'll have access to space. But what humanity did in the 60s essentially was say, human intelligence is just a computer program. We don't know that. That is an assumption. And I think that is the wrong assumption. And we are missing so much that we can't even imagine how wrong we are. And we've seen this before. We had phlogiston theory for 100 years or more, where in phlogiston theory, the theory of heat was that there was a common element in everything that burnt, the burning stuff. There was, wood had this phlogiston in it, and that's what burnt. And it wasn't until Lavoisier and Priestley looked at it a different way and said, no, the common thing is not in the thing that burns, the common thing is the oxygen outside of what burns. And when you look at all the evidence that was already around of measuring masses of things, phlogiston theory couldn't possibly have worked. But it was what the theory was, and so everyone tried to shoehorn it in. And that's what we're doing with AI and neuroscience right now, trying to shoehorn it into computation. And I think eventually we will come, someone out there, and I hope they're listening in on this right now, somewhere out there, there's going to be someone who thinks about things differently and comes up with a different way of thinking about it. And afterwards, after 30 or 40 years of pain for that person, everyone will say, well, that person was really smart. Why? So please, all of you out there, think deep thoughts and figure this out.
Sure. No, and Rod, just two messages which I took from your responses. One, which I could totally relate with this thing that if you want to do it today, I don't even know what's the starting point, right? And I totally understand when you say that I can't even write on a paper that these are the pieces, and if I put these pieces together, I will do it. The other point which you were making, which is interesting, was that is it really a computation? Is human intelligence really a computation, right? And from that, where my mind also went, and I split this question into two. One is on the idea of consciousness, that humans are conscious beings. And I remember Ray Kurzweil made a prediction that machines will be conscious in the 2020s or something like that. So if you have any thoughts on that piece, but also, when you say that, is human intelligence a computation, we also go into a different direction where people start attributing mystical meanings to human intelligence, right? And say, oh, is Rodney Brooks really trying to say it's not computation because he thinks it is something deeply mystical and so on? So if you can comment on both those.
The example of building rockets. We don't think rockets are computation. We all agree with it. And that's all I'm saying. I'm saying, you know, the fact that we think it's computation could be wrong. You know, you probably, you know, have taken a course or had some control theory where you have a feedback loop, and it's a continuous loop, and mechanical feedback and electronic feedback has been around for a long time. You don't have to think of that as computation. You think of that as differential equations, and that's the right way of thinking about it. Thinking about it as the on the steam engine, the lever gets thrown this far by the centrifugal force, and it's not the centrifugal force sends it a message, sends it a bit packet to tell it to move. It's a physical force that moves it, and that's how that control system works.
Got it. No, absolutely. I got it. And that, takes me to one of my next questions. So I'll just give you my crude understanding of how people have thought about AI, especially when in my days at MIT. My crude understanding was that what Marvin was saying was that you should try to understand common sense and how, humans think, and from that you'll get the answer. You were talking about embodied intelligence, which I think is what you're trying to allude right now also too, where we think that, build these robots and there's probably some things in their physics and in the dynamics which happens, which will evolve, human intelligence. And I also recall, your very interesting and famous paper that elephants, don't play chess, where you were talking about, there's some things which even animals and humans do very simply, but which machines are not able to do. And now in the last decade, we have seen, and I remember doing my machine learning class where we had this one lecture on neural networks, and Leslie Cabling was my instructor, and she said, we are just teaching this because we have to, it was there somewhere, but it is of no relevance. No one cares about neural networks. SVM was the technique which everyone would probably use. Now in the last decade, deep learning and neural networks have come back in a big way. And it has also solved some of the things, which, if I understand right, you talked about, like solving speech recognition, which humans did very well and machines were not able to do. So it solved some of those problems, but it is probably not.
It's enabled progress in some of them. I wouldn't say it's necessarily solved.
Sure.
What deep learning has got the speech signal to phoneme very, very well.
Right. So there was this understanding common sense, and there was this embodied intelligence, and which continues, and then there's this deep learning. Where would you put your money on what will solve AI if you put it today? What is the direction people should take in this whole,
Yes. So let me bifurcate, and it gets back to the analogy of aviation versus space travel. In the aviation world of exploiting what we currently have, there's still a lot to be done, and there actually I'm a little closer to Marvin in saying that common sense is important. One of the examples you see all the time for self-driving cars is a truck goes by and it's got a picture of a person painted on it, and suddenly the self-driving car thinks there's a person in front of it, because it doesn't have the common sense to realize it's the wrong size. Things that we just instantly realize it must be a picture. So there's a lot of simple things like that, which I don't think humans solve through computation, but which we could have an approximation to with computation and build better systems today. The longer term question, how to get human level intelligence, which by the way, I think is a multi-100-year problem. 300 years from now, we'll still be puzzling over aspects of this. So it's not going to be a quick hit. It's not going to be one formula or one thing. It's going to require a different way of thinking. And really, it's I think it's a better way of talking about dynamic systems and how pieces interact. We're not good at that. We have gotten by for the last 50 years by using computation to simulate dynamics, but we don't understand it in a deep way. Calculus, when it came along, got us a little bit of dynamics. We could solve certain things, but only special cases. And I think that dynamics of interacting pieces is something that we have no real science for at this point.
Got it. Got it. Rod, I'm taking one of the audience questions, and I think you might have already answered it, but why I'm taking it up is that it is a lot in the popular discourse, GPT-3, which everyone is talking about. And we'd love to hear your, and by the way, we tried to use it for some tasks, and it was very brittle. And it kind of, it reminded me of the no free lunch theorem, that if something is built to do everything right, it doesn't do anything right. But what are your thoughts? Because people have seen great things being done with GPT-3. It's making websites, it's doing a conversation, it's writing a blog, so on and so forth. Or some of them are very seemingly intelligible. Is that a pathway to reach human intelligence? And I know I'm asking this question again and again, but why I'm asking it is because my audience would understand it with one of these metaphors better than being more philosophical about it.
Yeah, well, I know that you're aware of the blog post I posted on the 1st of January, where I had what is best described as a rant about GPT-3. The researcher in the US, Will Bridle, who likened GPT-3 to a Ouija board. Is that how you pronounce it? Ouija board? You know, where you talk to the departed spirits, they move their. Everyone puts their finger on a cup, moves and spells things out, and all the people in the darkness think, oh, we've contacted the spirits, but it's just them doing it themselves. And that's really what is going on with GPT-3. People look at the output and see in it things of pieces of brilliance, and it's not helped by the press, by the way. I point out that the Guardian, which is a respectable news outlet, got it to generate 8 500-word little snippets, and then the editors went and took those 4,000 words, selected 1,100 of those words, and said that GPT-3 wrote this essay. But it didn't write the essay. The people took the sentences and patched them together in a way which made sense. And that's what's going on with a lot of these GPT-3 examples. It has no deep understanding of what's going on. And if you look at Gary Marcus and Ernie Davis, they've done a debunking of it, showing how little it really understands about the world. It is in the eye of the beholder. And, part of the reason I keep waving these flags is I've been around a really long time. So I've seen these cycles again and again. In the 60s, it was a program called ELIZA that Joseph Weizenbaum wrote at MIT. And people say, my God, I'm talking to this psychiatrist and it's helping me. And it was, today it would be a program that if someone couldn't write after the 3rd lecture in a computer science class, you'd feel they hadn't really been listening. We do this again and again. And I'm sorry that people keep getting fooled, but we've seen in the political world, people like to get fooled and they love it. And I'm sorry.
Sure. No. So totally understand that. Rod, one of the few of our audience have asked a question on the application of robotics in education and school education, and probably it comes more so from a country like India because we have a huge capacity problem in teachers. We have a huge problem in education itself with the school system not delivering enough, and one of the dreams which people have is that probably AI and technology could take away some of that burden. And maybe it can be seen in light of what you were talking about, it helping elderly people in China. But do you think technology is mature to play some role in school education, or what would be the interesting problems in that area to look at in the next decade?
Well, maybe I should be asking you this question because you're the one who has applied AI in a domain that didn't seem like it could possibly work as well as you made it work in testing the people. This has already been you're one of the most successful people at this in the world, so maybe you should answer it rather than me. My take on it is not to replace teachers. I don't think there's anything there, but robotics is fun, and with things like Raspberry Pi and Pi Zero, fairly low cost now to get what used to be, $1 million machine a few years ago to control a robot. And so fairly, relatively low cost to much cheaper than smartphones or even dumb phones. You can get enough stuff to do something interesting. And so in terms of having kids, be inspired to work on things and figure stuff out, I think robotics can be an enormous amount of fun. Not for everyone, but for a bunch of people, and that will be a gateway to the drug of science. They can feel empowered, they can figure stuff out, and then they can go off and do other things. So for me, that's where robotics might play a role in the short term. And I'll watch what next company you start to do the other part of it.
Sure. No, and I think, Rod, in my experience, one of the things which I think is a big opportunity of AI in education is that the way education works, in my mind, is with this feedback loop, where the teacher gives you feedback on what you have done right or wrong. And I think there, and I'll take a particular example, which I think is today solvable with AI, and I've been keen on doing something about it, that I think a teaching assistant for programming, today AI could probably do that, right? Which can look at the program of a person and give him or her hints to be able to correct the program. So why, at least when I was learning programming, I thought that one of the biggest challenges of learning it was when you get stuck in a program and you don't know how to come out of it, and then you would call someone, a teacher or someone who would help you get unstuck out of it. And I think AI can play that role today, where you are not only showing lectures with MOOCs, but when you give the person a programming problem, and here again, why the problem gets simplified is that we know that we have given a particular task to the candidate, and he or she is writing a program for that. And then, we can give them very conceptual level feedback automatically and on scale about what kind of errors they are making, and get them to start learning how to do programming. So I think AI, because when we are teaching, a lot of problems which we give to kids, they are bounded. AI can solve them today, and we can start getting a lot of this feedback loop happening automatically. And it doesn't need the intervention of teacher at every moment in the process.
Yeah, but at the same time, we have to be careful because I've seen so many examples of in the US. There's just not enough mathematics teachers, and so people who don't understand mathematics at all end up teaching mathematics to kids. And then if the kid is at all smart, they will come up with a better answer than what that teacher knows from their teaching manual, and the teacher says, "No, you're wrong," and it crushes the best students. And that's actually an aspect of being a teacher that's important, and that is to give encouragement. It's not just to feedback, it's also to give encouragement at the right time to empower people to be better, which is why I say that, a good application of robotics is for kids to go and explore, because having the robot do something gives them the feedback that they got it, they did something smart, and they can show off to their peers. Look, I can make it do this. Look, I can make it do that. So there's, I worry. There are so many brilliant people who have been utterly crushed by whatever school system they're in, and didn't break out. Ramanujan broke out, but he was incredibly lucky. And so for me, the world could be so much better if there were more really smart, if all that raw talent down there has a chance to succeed, the world could be a much better place. Oh, maybe a little more chaotic, because they're all, the really smart people are a little crazy too. But
sure.
But that's the good thing about being human.
Yeah, I agree. And chaos is something we know very closely in India, and I know you have been here and you've seen it firsthand. But it's a very accommodative chaos, where the accommodation itself creates chaos. You just have a few minutes left, Rod, and I think what a lot of people are looking to know, and we all have both high school students here and college students, there is that, are there books which you would recommend for high school students who are interested in robotics and or college students, or resources? What could, if people who are interested in robotics at a school level, high school level, or in college and you have already talked about some of the things they can do, but what kind of resources, books they can refer to?
Oh, I wish I'd thought about this ahead of time, because that's not something that I normally think about.
I didn't. My purpose was not to put you on a spot. We can send that offline.
It's a great question. There are some good books around. There's one that I want to recommend, but I know that today is the deadline for the author to get the new version into the publisher, so it won't come out for a little while. But Maya Mataric, M-A-T-A-R-I-C, at MIT Press has a primer for robotics, and the edition 1 is out, but it's been out for a few years. But edition 2 is going to be out soon. So there's one example. But there are lots of websites which talk about this too, and lots of communities around Raspberry Pi. So if you look up Raspberry Pi, you'll find many communities. Chris Anderson, who used to be editor of Wired and then started a company called 3D Robotics and did a lot of drone navigation. He runs an organization now in San Francisco that has competitions for self-driving cars, which are little tiny cars on fake roads. There's a lot of activity around that, a lot of websites around that. Another thing to look at is maybe to go to MIT and look up Duckie-town, D-U-C-K-I-E, Duckie-town. And Duckie-town is a set of problems and exercises for, again, low-cost robots, navigation in this fake town. And it's used in lots of courses all over the world. So I'm sorry that I'm not organized here. I'm just thinking about them one after the other. But so Duckie-town, I think, is something to go and look at. Also.
No, this is very helpful, Rod, and we'll put this in a structured form and send it to the participants in an email after the session. My last question to you, and if you would want to talk about anything yourself, please feel free to do that as well. But I know that you like to trash a lot of predictions and maybe also make some predictions. So would you like to share any predictions on robotics, or trash any predictions which are commonly believed over the next, in the coming year, or over the coming 10 years, or the coming century?
I don't mean to be a trasher. I mean to be a realist. Well, one thing is, it was a great story you told about being in Leslie Cabling's class and her saying neural nets, well, we got to teach them, but they're not important. And then we've had deep learning, which has completely changed the world. But if you look back over the history of AI, there have been many things like that have come and gone. And neural networks came and went 3 or 4 times, depending how you count. Yep. One prediction I have is that sometime in the next 5 to 7 years, there'll be a new hot thing, different from deep learning. It may not be anything to do with learning at all. It will be something else in AI, and it will catch on fire. It will have many applications in the real world. It will become the hot conference to go to. And a lot of people will get very excited by it, and it'll be very interesting. Now, the important thing about this is it must already exist. We just don't know what it is. So out there right now are people working on some problem and publishing and making slow progress. And one of those things is going to catch fire in the next 5 to 7 years. So if we talk again a decade from now, it won't be about deep learning. It'll be about something else, which will be new and exciting. And it will happen.
No, and Rod, I think we can conclude on this note. But my own, as you're very much saying, right, my own learning was that innovation happens in this non-linear way, right? And people were doing these Bayesian methods and SVM for all this time, and suddenly neural networks came out from somewhere else where a few people were pursuing it. But again, another joke was that if you had neural network in a paper title for the decade starting 2000, it would not get accepted, or the 2 decades. And now if you don't have neural network in the title, it would not get accepted, right? And I think the message for our audience is that, a new techniques like deep learning comes and we all start chasing it. but we need to think more openly about the big questions in AI and robotics. And deep learning doesn't solve a number of things, but doesn't have all the answers. And as you pointed out, right, the answers could be in methods and techniques and knowledge, which might be already there, but someone has to discover it, apply it rightly, and there might be a totally new vista of, which would open with it. And I think part of it is in what you were saying earlier, right? That there are so many unsolved questions. So we should totally, our audience should know that AI is not solved, is not remotely solved. Robotics is not solved and not remotely solved. And they should look, if you're doing work in deep learning, that's great, but you should also look beyond it and be more creative. Like Rod was saying, that we don't even know how to begin answering certain questions. And, some of, you should also be exploring that and look at what are the new methods or new ways of thinking which can come. With that, Rod, if you have a concluding statement to make, we'd love to hear that from you. And I'd again like to thank you for joining us from California. And I know it's an early hour for you. And also good luck for your book. And we'll be excited to share it with our audience when it comes out. But if do you have any concluding remarks, please?
Well, first, let me thank you for this opportunity to talk to everyone. I really appreciate that. It's very, very kind. And I want to say that all the students, high school and university students there, we're not going to run out of problems in AI or robotics. We're not going to run out of them. There's plenty there. There's plenty to work on. But one has to understand that on average, things are really hard and take a long time. So you have to keep your faith and stay dedicated and work at it. And good luck. And I hope someone out there is working on the next big thing right now. And that'll be so exciting.
Thank you, Rod. And I hope they're here with us today, one of them probably. And I think this is a great note to start the new year. Thanks again, Rod. Thanks to all the participants. And we'll be collating some of the resources which were talked about in this talk and sending it out. Thank you, Rod. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much, Professor Brooks. Thank you, Mr. Aggarwal. That was a wonderful session, and I'm sure our attendees gained a lot out of it. On that note, we'll be concluding the first day, our opening day of India Science Month online, a month-long celebration of science and technology. We have put in a couple of links for you all to enjoy in the chat box. There is a link for you to head over to our website and check out the entire program schedule for the coming few weeks. We are hosting our festival till the 31st of January. So make sure you head over to our website, check out the events that you're interested in, register for them, and we'll send you updates about the same. We also have a feedback form that we would love for you all to fill out, because we are here to improve the experience of learning and enjoying science. Please make sure that you take out just 2 minutes of your time to give us feedback so that we can improve over the coming few weeks. On that note, I thank you all for taking time out on this Sunday evening and joining us at India Science Month online. I will hope to see you in the coming few weeks. Till then, please keep enjoying science, keep celebrating science with us, and make sure you hear the voice of science at India Science Fest. Thanks so much.